Hello everyone, I'm going to show you two painting methods, the alla prima technique and the traditional layer by layer method that I use in my paintings. Alla prima or wet on wet is a painting technique in which layers of wet paint are applied to previous layers of wet paint. In my sketch, I use this technique which allows me to complete in one session without waiting for the paint layers to dry completely. In the very early stages, I used thinned oil paint for painting. I plan ahead for the color placement on a small sketch, but I focus on the big shapes in the landscape, for example, like the church of San Lorenzo. Then I quickly paint the light and dark areas of my sketch. This is in order to understand the depth in the composition. After our main elements are blocked in the details, are now beginning using impasto strokes and thickly applied paints. The Macchiaioli technique literally means spot, helps me convey quickly the overall tonal effect of the subject or composition. As you can see, I use a large brush to paint the visual shapes of the buildings, so alla prima technique allows me to make changes but still retain a fresh feel. It also requires us to know how to mix colors. We will need to know the value relationships in our subject and how to mix colors to match. The second technique is layer by layer, which involves making the landscape step by step. The Macchiaioli used the mezza macchia technique as a starting objects in the dark and light shades for broad tonal compositions. I use this method in my sketch, but for me it's important to initially make a monochrome underpainting. It's almost always used as a first step in the painting process. I use pigments like a burnt sienna and cobalt blue for underpainting. I usually paint with the large brushes to build a composition and measure the proportions of the objects to get everything in the right place. After I have determined the location of the objects on my canvas, I begin to paint in color. Here I'm using the dominant colors such as light blue for the shadows and the yellowish white for the highlight parts. As you can see, at this stage, the light brushstrokes have a dense tint and will stand out against the background of other dark objects. The Macchiaioli technique involves applying a certain pigment that remains in an almost pristine state as a building block of the full-blown visualization. The next step is to add texture and the color depth. As we can see, light and shadow take on exaggerated contrast on the right side of the picture. On the left side of the painting, the church is in shadow. We can also see reflexes and environmental influences, which will have some tints in the blue shadows. The last stage is working on small details to complete the paintings. I usually work with a thin brush to highlight all the details. I like to use more detail for the key features and less detail for areas which are less significant. No matter what style or subject artists choose, they still need to create depth and contrast so the composition will be harmonious and aesthetically pleasing. Thank you for watching.